Alrighty, let's do it.
Happy with the
Recording? Yeah, all good.
Okay.
Okay.
Got your audio, go.
Well, welcome to 10 with Tom. My name is Tom, and this is where we get to explore faith together 10 minutes at a time. Today's message is entitled A Tale of Two Stories. So today I want to mix the format up a little bit. I'm not really going to preach at you today. Hopefully I don't do that all the time, or give you any kind of specific scriptural text. I will give you some scripture at the end. But today, in kind of the short time that we have together, what I want to do is just tell you two separate stories, two true stories, in fact, and then almost just leave it there and then let you make up your mind as to what those stories might mean for you today. So, let's get straight into it. You may have heard me preach on this before. I love these two stories. The first is story number one. Many years ago, Al Capone virtually owned Chicago. Capone wasn't famous for anything heroic. He was notorious for enmeshing the Windy City in everything from bootleg booze to prostitution to murder. He was a gangster. And Capone had a lawyer nicknamed Easy Eddie. Easy Eddie was Capone's lawyer for good reason. He was very, very good. In fact, Eddie's skill at legal kind of maneuvering kept Al Capone out of jail for a very long time. So to show his appreciation, Capone paid Easy Eddie very well, and Eddie kind of lived the high life in Chicago with the Chicago mob, and he gave little consideration to the atrocity that the organization was a part of and what went on around him. Eddie did, however, have one soft spot. He had a son that he loved dearly, and he saw to it that his son had everything that his son needed: clothes, cars, a good education. Nothing was withheld, and of course price was no object. And despite his kind of involvement in obviously crime, Eddie even tried to teach his son right from wrong. He wanted his son ultimately to be a better man than he was. And yet with all his wealth and influence, there were two things he just couldn't give his son. He couldn't pass on a good name or a good example. One day, Easy Eddie reached a difficult decision. He wanted to kind of rectify the wrongs that he had done. And he decided that he would actually go to the authorities and tell the truth about Al Scarface Capone. He'd clean up his tarnished kind of reputation and offer his son some semblance of integrity. But to do this, he would of course have to testify against the mob. And he knew that that would cost him greatly, risk of his life, in fact. So he testified anyway. Sadly, within a year, Easy Eddie's life ended in a blaze of gunfire on a lonely Chicago street. But in his eyes, he had given his son the greatest gift he had to offer, at the greatest price he could ever pay. Police removed from his pockets a rosary, a crucifix, a religious medallion, and a clipping from a magazine that read this: "The clock of life is wound but once, and no man has the power to tell just when the hands will stop at late or early hour. Now is the only time you own. Live, love, toil with a will. Place no faith in time, for the clock may soon be still." Story number two. Also a true story. World War II produced many heroes. One such man was Lieutenant Commander Butch O'Hare. He was a fighter pilot assigned to the aircraft carrier Lexington in the South Pacific during World War II. One day his entire squadron was sent on a mission, and after he was airborne he looked at his fuel gauge and realized that someone had forgotten to top up his fuel tank, and he would not have enough fuel to complete the mission and get back to the ship. So his flight leader told him to return to the aircraft carrier, and reluctantly Butch O'Hare dropped out of formation and headed back to the Navy fleet. But as he was returning to the ship, he saw something that literally turned his blood cold. A squadron of Japanese aircraft were speeding its way towards the American fleet. And the fighters who were gone on a mission had left the fleet all but defenseless. He tried to reach his squadron and bring them back in time, but he couldn't, nor could he warn the fleet of the approaching danger. So there was only one thing to do. He must somehow divert the Japanese attack from the fleet. And so, laying aside all thoughts of personal safety, he dove into the formation of Japanese planes. Wing-mounted .50 calibers blazed as he charged in shooting, attacking one surprise enemy plane after another. Butch wove in and out of this now broken formation and fired at as many planes as possible until all his ammunition was finally spent. But he didn't stop there. Undaunted, he continued the assault. He dove at the planes, trying to clip a wing or a tail in hopes of damaging as many enemy planes as possible, rendering them unfit to fly. Finally, miraculously, the exacerbated Japanese squadron actually took off in another direction. And so, deeply relieved, Butch O'Hare and his tattered, damaged fighter limped back to the aircraft carrier, and miraculously he made it. Upon arrival, he reported in and he related the event surrounding his return. And the film from the gun camera mounted on the plane told the whole story. It showed the extent of his daring attempt to protect the fleet, and in fact showed that he'd actually destroyed 5 enemy aircraft by himself. Now, this took place on February 20th, 1942. And for that action, Butch became the Navy's first ace of World War II and the first naval aviator to win the Medal of Honor. A year later, sadly, Butch was killed in aerial combat at the age of 29. His hometown would not allow the memory of this hero to fade, and today, O'Hare Airport in Chicago is named in tribute to the courage of this great man. So next time, or if you ever find yourself at O'Hare International Airport in Chicago, give some thought to visiting Butch's memorial display. It's a statue with his Medal of Honor. It's located between Terminals 1 and 2. So, what do these two stories have to do with each other? I always get emotional on this story. Butch O'Hare was Easy Eddie's son. Just let that sink in for a moment. Like I said, I don't want to preach at you today, but let me leave you with this one scripture. Proverbs 13 verse 22. It says, a good man or woman leaves an inheritance to his children's children. You see, the truth is every single one of us have an opportunity to leave a legacy behind. An inheritance is not limited to money. And this is not just a message for parents. We can all live our lives in such a way that leaves the world a better place. And it may take making tough decisions, but all of us can do that. Psalm 145 verse 4, one generation shall commend your works to another and shall declare your mighty acts, speaking of the Lord. So I don't know what that means for you today. I don't know what leaving a legacy looks like for you, but I will leave you with this question. How are you living today that will leave a legacy for tomorrow? Thank you so much for joining us for another episode of 10 with Tom, and we'll see you all next time.